In a world where autism is often seen as a disorder to be fixed, there is a growing movement of people who are fighting for affirming care. What does affirming care mean for autism? Also, what might that look like when an individual with autism is a person of color or when English is not their first or primary language? How might we examine the social and cultural messaging that can impact an individual with autism? Welcome to People of Color in Psychology, the show that explores mental health topics specific to culture, diversity, and communities of color. I am your host, Jack Tsen. We have Dr. Reyes-McDonald today. She is a bilingual licensed psychologist and a licensed specialist in school psychology with over 17 years working in public school settings. Dr. Reyes-McDonald is also a group practice owner, specializes in autism and neurodiversity, behavioral and emotional and learning disorders assessments, and implementation of behavioral interventions. As a Latina, second-generation immigrant, and Jewish Portuguese descent, Dr. Reyes-McDonald will be having a conversation with us today about the value of affirming care for autism and neurodiversity, especially with clients of color. Dr. Reyes-McDonald, thank you for speaking with me today.
Thank you. So glad to be here.
You bet. It's a delight to speak with you about this topic. Can you share with us just how did you get into treatment of autism?
I'll tell you how I went into psychology. I was a gifted learner, and I had the teachers love me. Of course, they do that because I love to read, I love to learn, and I was a little quirky, but they saw that as part of the giftedness. And so, I just cruised along. But I distinctly remember learning being very easy as far as the academic things, but people, just watching them interact and watching the decisions that they were making, it just did not make sense to me. So I remember even watching my parents and the adults around me wonder, like, why did they do that when that obviously wasn't going to be a good choice? Like, that was so obvious. And so I would tell them, I was in elementary, like, I want to be a psychologist when I grow up. And they would laugh at me and say, oh, you're going to help us crazy people. That's the Latino culture. And they would laugh about it. So I became really interested in why people do what they do pretty early on. I was very quiet, but I was very good at observing people interact, and peers and adults. And so when I was in college, I went to Baylor University for undergrad, and I majored in psychology. And then it was junior year of college. I went to a speech being given by a school psychologist there. And he talked about what school psychologists do. And for me, school was a happy place. I didn't realize that there were school psychologists at that point until I went to this talk. And so when I heard that there was a way that I could be in the schools for my career, not as a teacher, because I am not a good teacher. I'm a very impatient teacher, but to help people, to help other kids, to help kids, I was fascinated. And so I looked up the best schools in Texas for school psychology. And one of the top schools is in Clear Lake, the University of Houston of Clear Lake. And so I decided to apply, and I interviewed, and I got accepted. And so when I became an intern for my master's program, because I'm Latina, I speak Spanish. Spanish was my first language. They would ask me to take on cases where the child or their parents were Spanish speaking, were bilingual. And that is where I started getting assigned all sorts of different cases, including autism evaluation. Now, obviously at that point, I'm a brand new intern. I didn't really have the right training to be doing these type of evaluations, but I was under supervision, so I was doing them, with my supervisor. And I remember being very interested in those cases. They were just so interested in the features, the students. They could be very intelligent, but we saw some social differences, right, in the way they interacted with other kids. And so when I became a school psychologist and I continued to take these kind of cases, because as a bilingual evaluator, as a bilingual school psychologist, there aren't enough of us. So you really are tasked with these complex cases. And so I took it upon myself to make sure I got training on how to do bilingual psychology, because it isn't just about speaking the language. It's a whole art.
Oh, can you give me some examples?
Yeah, so for example, to diagnose learning disorder in a bilingual child, there's way more complex than doing so in a monolingual child. So we have to consider, when we're looking at a child's learning, if they have a second language, if English is their second language, we have to consider, is this a language issue or is this a learning issue? Or is it both? Because it can be both. And so I sought that training from people in my district that were experts already. And so they taught me. And then along the way, other trainings from national experts, Dr. Sam Ortiz, for example. And then I did that for some years. And then when I heard about the University of Houston starting this school psychology program, this doctoral level school psychology program, I was really interested, because at that point I was thinking, what else can I do for these students? The parents were asking me, can you see my child after school? Can they come to you and see you for counseling? And I had to tell them, I can't. My license doesn't allow me to work outside of the schools like that. And so as a master's level LSSP, we were not even allowed to call ourselves school psychologists as a master's level, this licensed specialist in school psychology. We recently won the right to call ourselves school psychologists as a master's level LSSP, but I'm not sure if it's already in effect right as of today. It's coming. But back then I could not, and you still cannot practice outside the schools as a master's level school psychologist, you cannot. And so I decided I'm going to go back, get my PhD so I can become a licensed psychologist, and I can help kids, not just in the schools, but outside the schools. And so I can get more training on how to work with autistic students. And so that's what I did as part of my program, the practicum setting. The assignments that I did were at Texas Children's, the Meyer Center for Developmental Pediatrics. I spent a year there. I spent a year at it used to be called MHMRA, now it's called the Harris Center. So I wanted to see what happens across the lifespan. Autistic, I was used to working with K through 12 autistic individuals, but then I wanted to know, okay, as adults, then what happens? So I got that training and experience, and combining that with my bilingual testing expertise, I actually have become an expert in assessing autism assessment in people who are culturally and linguistically diverse. And that includes not just Spanish speakers, but anyone that's culturally and linguistically diverse. And so that's basically how I came to be one of the local experts in autism.
Wow, that's quite a bit of journey and undertaking. It all sparked from your curiosity and interest in trying to help these kids, and then suddenly discovering, the help doesn't just stop when you're a kiddo. The help continues even through adulthood.
Yeah, so there's definitely differences in the way the autistic brain processes information and emotions. And the social piece, there are definite differences across the lifespan. And so my interest was in figuring out, well, what can we do? The schools are limited in what they can do. When they have to relate directly to their learning, right, their educational performance. And so that's why these parents were asking, because they weren't getting supports in the schools. Can you see them after school? And so that's what we've done with my private practice. I ended up opening up a private practice in the Woodlands. It's called Grace Psychological Services. We do a lot of autism and ADHD, dyslexia assessments in our practice. And we are considered, the experts. If you talk to other people and they need an autism assessment, they will refer to us. The one thing we had trouble keeping up with, though, is the demand for services after the diagnosis. Is okay, so now what? So I have clinicians that provide some of those services, but we haven't been able to keep up with the demand for the services. And so how far do you want me to go? Because at this point now in 2023, I know my journey has changed some. We talked about it before. I realized last year, a little over a year ago, that I myself am autistic. And things started clicking into place at that point.
Mhm. What led you to actually, how did that come about? The discovery of you being autistic?
Yeah. So I have family members had already been identified. And autism is largely genetic. So it's very heritable, it tends to run in families. And I remember just thinking about the other issue is, as a school psychologist and now in private practice, I'm seeing a lot of autistic individuals who are high IQ, high verbal, and they're the ones that tend to be overlooked in the schools and not get services. So even though they have extreme anxiety or maybe depression or maybe even behavior issues, they're not as likely to get services because their academics isn't as impaired. And so I was mulling over that, like, what can I do to help these kids? Like, what can we do? We identify them, and then they go to the school, and they don't get services there, and then they're having trouble finding services outside the school. And I was thinking about my 2022 for me was a very difficult year personally, and so it had me examining who am I, and I started thinking about my childhood. Remember, I was quiet, shy. I spoke English as a second language. I didn't speak English till I got to kindergarten. But I did really well in school. By second grade, that my teacher was chasing me down at the grocery store so I could come take the state standardized test. I happened to be absent that day, and the teacher literally called the house, "Where is Graciela? She needs to come take this test." We were at the grocery store. She calls Berkshire Brothers. Paige is my mother. Like, I need you to bring her to school so she can take this test. So I thought about all the things that I had trouble with. I struggled in adolescence, understanding why are the girls all of a sudden just like fighting with each other. They were friends before, then they're not friends, and now they're friends again. And I remember standing in the bathroom, the girls' bathroom, it must have been 6th or 7th grade, and telling my best friend, why don't we just not do that? Why don't we just stay friends and not fight?
That would be great for everyone.
Well, I wasn't her best friend for much longer after that.
Oh my gosh.
I just didn't understand the social stuff. And I started seeing the parallels. And honestly, what happened is I started doing more autism evaluations for adult females. And I was hearing their experiences. I'm like, well, that was my experience. That happened to me too. Socializing is still hard for me to this day. And just hearing that over and over, it kind of made me like one day, like, wait a minute. There's the genetic component is there. Like all these things that these women are telling me that they've gone through emotionally, socially, they're there. So it just kind of hit me like, and when I started looking back over my life in that lens, everything just made so much sense. But I'm a female autistic, and so I don't fit the classic autism profile. I'm very empathetic.
Okay, so can you clarify that for our listeners?
So the classic idea of autism is that it's a boy who engages in repetitive motor movements. Maybe they rock back and forth, or they repeat language, or they have sensory issues where maybe they're very picky with their eating, or certain noises bother them, and they interact with their peers in a way that's obviously different, and their communication is different. They might not be so highly verbal, or if they are highly verbal, they might be speaking like a little professor, all about dinosaurs. Well, this dinosaur lived during this period. And I don't fit that profile. I'm female. My brain is different, right? Female brains are different from male brains. And so female autistics are more, especially when they're high IQ, high verbal, like I am, they're more likely to learn to mask. So we watch other people to see, how am I supposed to act in this situation? And then you do that when you're in that situation. And because when you're high IQ, you can memorize a lot of things and keep that. And so then you know, okay, I'm supposed to do this. So for example, when I was in 5th grade, my English teacher, I forgot what I did. She was getting on to me for something, which was a surprise because I was very quiet, never got in trouble. But she wasn't happy with me for some reason. And my dad had told me not long before that, he said, when someone's talking to you, you need to look at them in the eye. You need to make eye contact. Apparently, I wasn't making eye contact. So he told me that, and so I was trying to do what he was telling me. So this teacher, and she was getting on to me, and so I was looking at her. I was making eye contact with her, listening to her. Well, she took offense. She thought I was being sassy by looking at her in the eye. And I remember thinking, like, I thought I was supposed to look people in the eye. What? That's what I was taught. I was told to do more. But then I learned, okay, you can't do it just looking at directly too long. Like there's subtleties to it, right? You have to look away. And I remember that was something.
So you're looking, and for you, it's a direct, intense gaze.
Yeah, it isn't.
I see. It was like this. It was more like I got to focus.
Well, it was long. Yes, focused, yes. And I think too long.
Yeah.
And I didn't understand the subtleties yet. And I remember learning that in middle school, learning about the subtleties and watching how other people made eye contact to learn. But I learned. And so most people, if they know me, if they meet me, they're probably not going to just deduce that I'm autistic.
Yeah. And I want to clarify for our listeners, just because they can't see, that when you were demonstrating the eye gaze, I can totally see how, that gaze, if someone looked at me this way, it demonstrates a different social message as opposed to someone kind of looking lightly. So I just want to clarify that for our listeners. Yeah,
I do, and I still do have an intense gaze as an adult. I don't know what that's. I still haven't figured that out. Like, what makes adult people give me feedback? Well, you have an intense gaze, like social situations.
Oh,
and I asked, like, what am I doing? I don't understand, because I've learned not to look too long, but now it's not even about the length of the eye contact. It's something about my particular eye contact that's very intense for some people.
Yeah. So these are some of the things that you're highlighting, the differences, between the male, female, also your personal experience. Can you tell us a little bit more of what affirming care looks like for autism?
So one of the classic autistic boy doesn't feel empathy. They don't understand why other people, are sad when they're sad, But as a female autistic, I actually am too empathetic. And this is true of that's just a myth, because that's true of male autistics as well. A lot of us are too empathetic. And what happens is when you're too empathetic is you literally will feel what the other person is feeling. And it's too much. Because imagine you're talking to this person, and you're like feeling what this person's feeling. It's a lot. And so sometimes you just don't know what to do with all that. And so you may freeze at that point. So it may look like you don't care, you're not reacting, but it may be that it's just too much at once for you. And so I believe that the autistic part of me is why I'm a psychologist today. Because I am empathetic. I do want to help people. I've been observing people for decades now, and I decided that I wanted to help them. I like helping people, and especially kids. For whatever reason, I really like helping kids. And so, because I think that kids are innocent, I believe in the clean slate theory. And so I believe that we can make a big difference in how kids develop when we work with them when they're younger.
Yeah. And what about the idea of the intersectionality between, diversity and autism? So if, let's say, your client is Hispanic, and also we're thinking about affirming care, what does that look like for, say, a clinician? How would we? Yeah.
So I think a big part of it is accepting. And again, my cultural background is Latino. So in my family, some people really liked me, and some people did not like me. My differences specifically. And even in my own family, some people were accepting that's who she is, and other people were like, well, no, she shouldn't be like that. And there was some generation. I was raised by my grandparents. My grandparents were more just like, okay, that's just who she is, and they love me no matter what. But the younger generations, I think I saw more of, well, why is she like that, right? And so as clinicians, I think we need to be aware of the cultural background that that client has been raised in, because they may be getting different messaging. So in the Latina culture, it's very much, well, the way I was raised, again, I'm second generation, was paternalistic, right? Patriarchal society, machista. You're a female, you're not allowed to go do the things that your younger brother gets to do because you're a female. Well, why? Because you're a female. Well, that's not fair. Well, and as a kid, I fought against the whole machista culture, and I did what I wanted to do. It didn't matter. I really, it didn't make sense to me. It still doesn't. And so some of my family members weren't happy that I was not following the cultural norms. And so, to be honest, I'm very stubborn, and so I'm not the stereotypical stay-at-home. My parent, for example, my mother didn't even go to college, even though she was very intelligent, because she wasn't allowed to. But I was. My grandparents, actually, her parents supported me in getting an education. So, but I was very stubborn about it too. Like, I wasn't just not going to do it. It's something I wanted to do. So I think as clinicians, we need to take into account where this person comes from, and understanding what they've been raised to believe, because there can be some guilt with that. For example, I had a client, an adult female, we were doing an autism evaluation, and they had a lot of guilt about not wanting to be around the family. In Latinos, we have big family gatherings. You're socializing, that's what we do, like on a weekly basis, maybe more than that. And so she couldn't do that. She didn't do that. She had a lot of guilt about that. When we finally, came to the diagnosis, it made so much sense. And she literally was crying in relief. I'm not a bad person. No, you're not a bad person. I'm autistic. Yeah, you're autistic. And so they have a different way of relating to people.
And so that's one way you're thinking about shining some light on this particular topic for our clinicians, giving them some skills to consider.
Yeah. So affirming to me means accepting that autism is a part of the person. It is who they are. It's not something that can be erased or fixed. It's not something that needs to be fixed. It's just who they are. And with autism come a lot of strengths as well, a lot of good things. Yes, there are some differences. Doesn't mean it's bad. Different doesn't mean to be bad. It's just different. And so what we want to do is to focus on the positive. So, okay, who are you, first of all? Because once we know who we are and why our brain works the way it does, I think it's such a relief. And you're like, oh, that's why this is hard for me, or that's why. And once you know that, and you can accept yourself as an autistic individual, then you can look at, okay, what are my strengths? What comes really easy for me? And what's maybe more difficult? What is there anything that I want to change? For example, I want to get better at chit-chatting, in a group setting. Okay, well then we can work on that. Or I want to have more friends. Okay, well, what does that look like for you? What do you want? And what's difficult for you? Because as an autistic, like I said, it's difficult to understand the rules, the social rules, and why they're there. And it doesn't make sense. One of it is, for example, me personally, I still have this particular issue, is I was taught to say what you mean and mean what you say. And I read it just the other day.
I must have gotten you in trouble all the time.
And I read it just a few days ago, so some article. Say what you mean what you say. Well, that's totally not true. That's not what actually happens. And so we can teach our clients, okay, this is what they're saying, but that's not what they're actually meaning. Here are the subtleties that come with that particular statement. And, it can get pretty complicated, and it takes time to work. It's like learning a new language, new culture, is the way I see it. And so with providing affirming care, you accept the value. You value this person as an autistic. We value them, and we don't assume that it's something bad that we need to fix. And the suicide rate in the autistic population is 2 to 7 times that of the general population. The suicide completion rate is 2 to 7 times that of the general population. And that's a problem. I see it very similarly to the gender issues, right? When we provide affirming care, we can help people live happy and fulfilling lives. That's what I want to do with the autistic population, is help them figure out who they are, provide affirming supports as they wish, right? And help them figure out who they want to be and help them do that and be happy.
Wow, that is such a staggering statistic there. And I'm glad there's people like you who are trying to change the narrative about how autism is a part of the person, as opposed to creating this idea that it's a disorder in which we must get rid of. Even I think we were talking about introducing this topic here, I think originally I was trying to describe it as autism spectrum disorder, but that's not as affirming as just supposed to say autism, and not even say spectrum or plus the disorder piece.
Yes. So neurodiversity is the diversity of human minds, right? It's the variation in neurocognitive functioning within our species, right? That's a fact. There is neurodiversity. So we consider autism to be part of that neurodiversity. It just is. It's part of who we are as human beings. And so we don't see it as something that needs a cure. We see it as something that brings as much value as anyone else, any other human being, right?
Yeah, it's like folks who are autistic bring a set of experiences to the population, and part of it is a blending of experiences as opposed to I'm trying to get rid of this.
Yeah, exactly. We're just part of the natural diversity of the human brain. And there are, I'm sure if you think back in the day, when humans were nomads, right? When we were nomadic tribes, and you had to remember where you could access from year to year water. Well, we went here, we traveled here, right? Knowing what resources, you could probably imagine if you had someone who had, a lot of autistic people are really good at memory recall. That's one of the strengths that we see. You can imagine how that would have been if you had someone like that in your group. Like had a really good memory, can remember, hey, it was here, we did this, or a very good sense of smell, because some of autistics have like heightened senses, right? They're more sensitive to smells, for example, or noises. You can imagine how that would have been an advantage back then when we had to worry about predators attacking us. Well, there's a reason that autism is part of our DNA. There's
a bit more of an evolutionary perspective. We survived. There are benefits to us. Dr. Reyes-McDonald, I'm wondering if you have maybe a final thought you'd like to share with our listeners?
I think my final thought is, and we see it, I mean, we can see, again, we're talking about people of color, right? It's our topic today, and we're talking about cultural, linguistic diversity, neurodiversity. I think it's really part of the same broad topic. I think we all have value regardless of our background, right? Whether that be gender, linguistic, cultural, neuro background. And I think, especially in these times that we're in, where we're so divided as a country and politically, I think it behooves us as clinicians to find a way to help our clients find commonality between all of us, right? Clients amongst clients, clinicians with our clients. I believe it's important for there to be clinicians of color that can then have the expertise in working with other people of color. I consider myself very fortunate that I've been able to work with hundreds of students, bilingual students specifically, because I myself am bilingual and I chose to go into this field. I believe that that's my purpose here and on this planet is to help specifically students. And I think, again, the autistic part of me is a big part of why I took the time, why I get so much out of it. To me, helping people makes me happy. I don't think I would have gone this path if I wasn't autistic and so curious about why do people act the way they do. So I think that we all have value regardless of our backgrounds.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your work and the significant contribution that you've made to your community as well as the people around you.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
You bet. And so where can people find you?
So our practice is Grace Psychological Services. Our website is gracepsychological.com. We're located in the Woodlands, Texas. And our newest project is called the Grace Autism Center. So stay tuned for that. We are opening our doors August 1st, 2023. So right now we're gearing up to make sure that we're ready to start seeing clients. And with our neurodiversity Affirming Care this August, we're very excited about that.
Wow. Well, I am excited for you. And, I hope you have a fantastic opening. And are y'all recruiting clinicians for that?
Yes, we are recruiting clinicians who have experience in working with the autistic population or even people with ADHD, dyslexia, and who are open to working with us on this vision, again, providing affirming care for neurodivergent individuals.
All right, Dr. Reyes-McDonald, again, thank you so much for your time.
You're welcome. It was great talking to you.
A huge thank you to our listeners. If you like what you've heard, please share and subscribe to our podcast, People of Color in Psychology.